Welcome to the Recruiting Masters podcast brought to you by the CFC Insider. We're Katie and Clint, and you're listening to our first CFL Draft edition with our good buddy, Quincy Forde. Quincy, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Dude, it's been a long time.
It sure has.
When was the last podcast? The last CFL draft that they had before COVID.
Was that really the last time we did it? First year of university has been a blur.
Oh yeah, especially at Western.
Well, we're glad that you've taken time out just to do this with us. But before we get into it, we're gonna let you know that you can follow us on our social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter @ChatFootball, Instagram CFC_football, and YouTube. And don't forget to purchase your CFC Insider Gold membership today for access to the CFC 40 ranking that we are going to be talking about over the next couple episodes, the analysis of these prospects and all the daily football recruiting news across Canada. So as the CFL draft is coming up May 3rd, there's a lot to talk about, Quincy, and I know that this is one of your favorite times of year to analyze and put in your voice of who you think should go where. And so today we're going to talk about some receivers. So let's get going with John Metchie III. He was number one on our CFC 100 ranking in 2019. Just a phenomenal athlete. I think we can all remember watching him play for Alabama. And unfortunately, he injured his knee in that last game. So it will be great to see what happens with him. But what do you have to say about Metchie?
Yeah, obviously doing the CFC 40 rankings, having him at number one was a bit of a no-brainer. Before even getting into him as a player, you can just look like you're the number one receiver at Alabama. You're going to be a high NFL pick. Like it's that straightforward. As a player, he's 5'11", 190, so not the biggest guy, but he's a complete route runner. He runs the whole route tree. He's pretty sophisticated in terms of his releases and the kinds of routes he can run. And another part of his game that jumps out at me is actually his downfield blocking. I don't know if you've seen a couple clips of him back on like some big Devontae Smith plays back in 2020.
Yeah.
But he is a very willing blocker. And I'm pretty sure going into the NFL, I think the vibe is kind of that he projects as a slot guy. The way I see him is he's a bit of a quarterback's best friend and coach favorite with the way he plays the game. He's a very tough receiver with his willingness to block and willingness to be physical both before and after the catch. He's a high IQ guy. He finds soft spots in zones. He got the ball a lot on screens actually at Alabama too. So obviously he's good after the catch. Like I started with, pretty much a no-brainer putting him at one. He's probably going to go in the second round of the NFL draft. I saw him mocked climbing up into the first, but then he tore his ACL in the SEC championship. So I'm pretty sure that'll slide him a little. I've seen him as low as third or fourth round, but I think once you get into the third round with a guy like him, that'll be a huge steal.
What do you think about him, Clinton?
Oh, I've liked him all the way since high school. We got to see him. I think he's a Brampton kid. He ended up at St. James in Maryland. And then he ended up at another prep school prior to going to Alabama. And the way they developed them at Alabama, because you get these like insane athletes who like stalk the depth chart in the roster at Alabama. And then they take a year or two to actually develop their game. But most of the people on that roster already have incredible intangibles, and he has that, like Quincy already mentioned. He like can run all the routes. He actually can get off the line of scrimmage. He can run in the screen game, as you mentioned, whether it's like an outside screen coming in or an inside screen working its way out. And yeah, there was a couple of times where you saw him blocking way downfield. So he's like a complete player. If he hadn't have got injured, he probably would have most definitely snuck up into the first round. He's probably one of the best receivers that's come out of Canada since Claypool would be the other notable one, but like just like a sheerly dominant receiver who went to like a power program and actually like proved that they could get it done at that power program.
Yeah, I mean, he played as a freshman. I mean, going to Alabama, obviously, like I said, becoming their number one receiver, but not just that, to come in and not redshirt at a school like Alabama, and then as a true sophomore to be having 1,000-yard season and then another 1,000-yard season as a junior is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
He's a guy you want on your team.
If you go back, you'll probably find it somewhere in the press releases. When he was a freshman at Alabama, he was the MVP of their whatever their spring game is. Like he had
their A-Day game, is that what they call it?
He had like 200 yards receiving as a freshman.
I remember that actually.
He most likely would have been on like they would have drafted teams, I'm sure, or however they do it there. But he probably would have been going against like legitimate 2 deep depth chart players and had 200 yards received. Yeah, he's awesome.
We're going to group the next two together. I know, Quincy, you're going to separate them, but the twins, Jalen and Tyson Philpott, also obviously the class of 2018, they were out our way. They went to high school at Seacklem out here in BC. And again, CFC 100s went on to have outstanding careers at U of C. They're just straight up ballers. So like you can't dispute, like we've been talking about, their production on the field. So Quincy, give us the rundown on the boys.
I mean, after Mechie, my next group of receivers are the Philpott brothers and Emelis, who we'll get to after. Obviously, the Philpotts are twins, and they're very, very identical almost as players.
Tell them apart. They are so hard.
Yeah, you can't tell them apart looking at them. And as players, they're also very similar. I'd say Jalen tends to play in the slot. Tyson's outside. I think Jalen's a little bit more physical, a little stronger, and Tyson's probably a little faster and maybe a bit more of a deep threat. Faster, quicker, but lighter and not as strong and not as physical. These two players have been lighting it up since they got to the university ranks, obviously. Tyson Philpott, I'm pretty sure, was the U Sports Rookie of the Year 2018. And then 2019, Jalen had the big year, and I'm pretty sure Tyson was hurt. But then Jalen kind of one-upped his brother's rookie season. And then this year together, after the 2020 break with COVID, they came out and had something like ridiculous in their first game together. They had almost like 400. They might have even cracked 400 yards receiving like together in their first game this season. Philpott did not have the greatest combine. Jalen ran a 4.65. Tyson ran a 4.59. Those times aren't bad, but they didn't show the same dynamic explosiveness that you expect that top tier receiver prospect to have. Like they had 30-inch verticals, which aren't the best. And they didn't have standout quickness numbers like some might have expected, given they're obviously very good football players. But watching Philpott, I like how Jalen uses a change of speed when he's running his routes. I find that is a big part of his route running that catches DBs off guard and allows him to beat them going from slow to fast or fast to slow. Plays with a bit of an edge. I said I think he's a little more physical than his brother, maybe playing out of the slot there. Yeah. And I also found Jalen to be really good at finding soft spots in zone coverages. Coming out of the slot there, he seems to always be open over the middle when he's as a zone beater. Yeah. And when the play breaks down, those are two guys who are always open. They're both great yards after catch players too. Despite not being the biggest guys, they're kind of like Mechie, actually. They're tough, kind of edgy receivers. I find Jalen actually to be a little bit better after the catch. I think Jalen's a little shiftier. I think they're both going to be very good players at the next level. I would have liked to see more out of them testing wise, but obviously these two guys have been tearing up U Sports since they entered.
Clint, you played against them at the high school ranks. What do you think of them?
They're like super athletic, but even like in high school, I never saw them run a 40, even at all their different events, like whether it was a CFC, which they would go to like because their dad was involved with the provincial team and stuff, but you never saw them run a 40. Not surprising. That's probably the reason they didn't run a 40. However, some people are faster than other people with the ball in their hands. Their 40-yard dash doesn't translate to actually how fast they are on a football field with the football in their hands.
I wasn't even as bothered by their 40s as much as their like broad jumps and vertical. That vertical is pretty bad. Like I'm not going to sugarcoat that one. 30 inches is not very good for a professional wide receiver, especially ones on the smaller end. 30 is not good at all.
Well, there's a correlation there, right? Between like lower body power and like the transfer of that power to them leading to a faster 40. Mm-hmm. That's all tied together. But like they are, we've already all mentioned, like they're ballers. Like they're straight up ballers. They kind of come from they got a bit of a bloodline. Their dad was a really, really, really good professional football player, albeit a running back. They were really good in high school. They were really good in U Sports. And I'm sure guys like that, they'll find their niche in the CFL and they'll be those like super slick. Well, at least Jalen will be that super slick inside receiver who can like run routes and make plays in space, so on and so forth. I'm not sure if he'll be like, I don't know. I kind of thought he was going to turn into like a Nick Dembski at some point, but obviously not Tyson because he's a little thinner. But I was kind of like thinking, I wonder if he'll be that type of player. Like if he'll fill out like that once he gets into the CFL.
Do you think that they have NFL potential?
No.
I'm on board with Clint there, but I was going to say, I think originally, if you had asked me this truthfully, if you had asked me this 2 months ago before their combine, I would have said yes, but their athletic testing measurement numbers, like those just won't cut it. I don't think they're going to get an NFL chance, but that obviously actually helps their CFL stock a little. And I think they're both first round guys, probably late first round guys, to be fair. But I think they're both guys who have the chance to make an impact right away.
Let's move on to the next one that you kind of grouped with the Twins. It's Samuel Emilus. Again, he was a Vanier player, Cégep, out of Quebec, another ridiculously athletic receiver. Also a former CFC 100, 2018. What do you have to say about him?
Yeah, I have the Philpots and him both in like that kind of 6 to 9 ranked range, back of the first round type guys. The thing is, I remember like 2 years ago watching his Cégep highlight and thinking this highlight tape is among the most ridiculous highlight tapes I've seen in my life. He made spectacular plays on that highlight tape. And I remember saying 2 years ago, because the Philpots were already tearing it up in U Sport, but Emelis didn't necessarily have that college production yet. I remember saying that these three are going to be the top 3 receivers in the draft class a couple years down the road, which they ended up being. So I'm happy because I called it. But Emelis is a guy who's an explosive athlete. He had a great pro day, actually. At his pro day, he ran his, again, like 4.59 40 is just all right, but 37-inch vertical, 10.4 broad jump, and a very quick 6.88 3-cone. So shows he's quick throttling down and in and out of breaks there, and that you can see that on tape too. Yeah. And 37-inch vertical, 10.4 broad jump shows some explosiveness there. And he actually had a higher bench number than most of the receivers, putting up 9 reps, which isn't like special, but the receivers weren't that strong this year. Some weak receivers. But yeah, Samuel Emilus is an explosive athlete. He's one of those guys who has that spectacular catch ability. On tape at Cégep, he had like 2 catches that I'd honestly place among like the top 5 most impressive catches I've seen in my life. I genuinely mean that. And he has also, much like Josh Palmer in this regard, I've seen him make a few catches at the sideline where he shows tremendous body control to get feet in. And that reminded me of Josh Palmer, because that was kind of the first thing that jumped out at me when watching Palmer year back. He's not as good as Palmer. Emelis can also work the back shoulder fades quite well. So that back shoulder body control, getting feet in, working the sideline type thing reminded me of Josh Palmer. Yes. Yeah, Emelis, he's a guy who I think belongs right there with the Philpots. And I'm pretty excited to see him. I could see a team like the Alouettes taking him. And quite frankly, I think he'd be an immediate upgrade on Kion Julian Grant, who I think is their only starting Canadian receiver right now. And I just know the Alouettes like their French guys, kind of where I just figured there's a decent chance he might end up. But I think he's going to be a very good CFL player too.
Clint, what do you have to say about Samuel?
He's a freak at Vanier who went to a UMass team that was really bad, and then ended up transferring to another school, which if you dive into something and you're like literally in year 2 or you've been around the block, well, you might not jump into the depth chart where you want to, or you may run into other issues because you generally don't transfer because you're happy. Yeah, UMass was bad, so he probably didn't get any opportunities. And he went to Louisiana Tech.
Yes.
So I'm sure that he probably worked his way in, but you simply have to go back and watch his Vanier highlight film to see what is what. And you can't take away the fact that he's like super athletic. And I think he's, what is he, 6'1", like 190?
He's 6 feet, 195.
Yeah, like that's thick. That's thick for a receiver, especially a kid who's fit, like who's actually in pretty good shape. That's a pretty solid body type that can do a lot of different things. And then in terms of like going to the Alouettes, yeah, they love their French dudes there. And the Grant kid, I actually played with his father at Acadia, Karim Grant, who got signed by the Atlanta Falcons.
Okay, all right.
What you said about Emelis, though, I actually meant to touch on. Yeah, he was kind of the only bright spot in that UMass offense. And then he transferred to Louisiana Tech. And obviously, I think he was like their 4th leading receiver. It takes a year to kind of climb the depth chart as a transfer, especially as like a senior transferring. So he wasn't their 4th best receiver. He's, without having seen their other receivers, it's probably their best, just guessing, because I think he's pretty good.
Well, you're diving into the middle of like maybe a an upper class quarterback and a receiver core that have a rapport already. It's not best case scenarios for sure. And who knows, a lot of football is like lottery anyway. Sometimes you just hit it right.
Moving on to Keaton Briggle. He's a 2019 class, but great frame, athletic. Quincy, what do you think he's going to play at the next level?
Yeah, Brugling is a bit of a unique one, kind of deviates from our last couple prospects of Philpott, Emelis, and Mechie, who are all kind of in like the 5'11", 6 feet range, 190, 195, all kind of similar builds. But then Brugling's a guy who's 6'3", 215, so he's a bigger body receiver. He uses that effectively. After the catch, he's hard to bring down. That's something that stands out. But he's a guy who didn't have the best college production at Carleton back in 2019. This is the thing with that year off. You look back to the year before this past year to try and get some historical gauge of what they've been like. It's not like all the guys in this class would have been all that important to their team as second years, and now they're fourth years. So like in 2019, he wasn't really that much of a difference maker. I think he had like one catch per game. But then this year, he was their number 2 receiver behind Glodin Mullally, who is still a joke that he wasn't drafted last year. Anyway, Brugling in 6 games this year, 17 catches, 225 yards, 3 touchdowns. So again, not the best production, which is why a guy like him could get overlooked. Yeah. But Carleton, I know their starting quarterback went down in like game 2, and their passing offense wasn't all that prolific. Yeah, Brugling, big body guy. He was an explosive athlete. He was invited to the combine, I almost think, as a guy who, I think he was a little heavier in season. I think he was like 6'3", 225. And I think they kind of invited him along with like Maxim Durich from Toronto and Chase Arsenault from McMaster to kind of see if he could be some tight end fullback type. But then he came in, weighed in 15 pounds lighter than he would have played at. So it's like, all right, let's see what this guy can do. And then he came in and totally showed out and showed that he's a real receiver, not just some big body clunky guy. And he came out, had like a 37.5-inch vertical, 10.4 broad jump. So explosive athlete, 4.55 40. So here he is 30 pounds heavier than the Philpots, running faster than him, faster than Emelis too. So obviously fast guy, tremendous athlete at 6'3", 215. And that's kind of the book on him, that a guy who's that athletic at that size, that's what you want to see.
Yeah,
and I could see him being a pretty good red zone target, big target over the middle, obviously. Yeah. But yeah, his production wasn't that big time at Carleton, but that's kind of the book with sometimes you find in some hidden gems who didn't have the production at the U Sports level, because you can be like so influenced by quarterback play and overall how good your team is in U Sports football.
This kid is the only one that wasn't a CFC 100, and so we don't really know a lot about him. Like, you don't really.
No, other than like his height, when we saw his measurables, we were like, oh, no wonder. Like, that just makes sense.
Yeah, I have him right now at 20 on my overall board. So I guess that would put him like top of the 3rd round. Yeah. But yeah, I could see him develop, like with a little development, probably not starting right away, but a guy who brings size to your receiver room, kind of a big body slot. And I think he's the guy who projects as an eventual starter in the league.
Well, moving on to another guy who is going to add value on the special teams, Gavin Cobb, a bit of an older prospect. He's a class of 2016. He came out of, played at Mount Doug out our way again from BC. He was a CFC 100, then went to Simon Fraser University, transferred to the University of Manitoba. Athletic, plays multiple positions. Give us the rundown on Cobb.
Yeah, Cobb's, but he's a guy, and watching him, he's very legit, but he's just a guy you watch and you think, I wish this guy were bigger. Because at 5'10", 170, you're going to be a little limited at the next level. That's quite small.
Yeah.
But he's a guy who's extremely shifty, fast, quick, all that, like more so than any other receiver we're talking about right now. Maybe Mechie, but Mechie's kind of in a thing of his own. With other than that, like as a CFL draft prospect, because Mechie really isn't a CFL draft prospect, he's more of an NFL draft prospect. As a CFL draft prospect, Cobb is the quickest, shiftiest guy in it, and he's quick in and out of his breaks. He was probably the most impressive guy in one-on-ones at the CFL Combine. Explosive athlete too. He had him and a guy who we're going to talk about later, Riley Borsma, had both fit in kind of the smaller receiver but ridiculous athlete category. Like Gavin Cobb ran a 4.53. His vertical was 41.5 inches.
Woo. Oh,
So that's
wow.
pretty absurd. 10-foot, 10-inch broad jump.
Oh,
So those are just ridiculous explosiveness numbers.
no
And
kidding.
6.973 cones. So there you see the quickness there. And he's one of those guys who you absolutely see that explosiveness and quickness translate onto his gameplay. And
Wow.
not just a quick, shifty, fast guy. I just know he's a very good returner. He might be able to provide some return ability in the CFL. And he's another guy kind of like Emelis, who I've seen him make a couple spectacular catches too. Maybe not to the same degree as Emelis, but I've seen him make some spectacular, sticky kind of one-handed catches. I've seen him make a couple sideline toe drag swag like catches. Size is just a very large limitation because you can't put him in the slot because he won't be able to block well enough. He's probably limited to field side wide out at the next level.
Do you remember anything about him? Like, he's
like, I mean, Quincy's already touched on most of the points. In high school, he was like super explosive and like not straight line fast. He still went in the end zone a lot, but like twitchy fast. I mean, my only hiccup is his height and his weight is an issue. The other stuff's super intriguing, but also I would get kind of hung up on the fact he is class of 216. So we're talking like he's been out of high school for 6 years. That's a long time.
See, I'm not sure that bothers me as much with the Sajep guys. Like there's all these like old guys and like Jaden Dalkey's like 25. Like he was another like 4-year junior guy. Like you're just older than everyone, man.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, they're like they're going to be rookies and they're going to be like 25 and 26.
Exactly.
Like that's when most football careers end. So anyways, that would be a kind of a hiccup. And then like, I don't know, I always have a bit of a hiccup too when I observe players who played at multiple schools. That's always something you have to do your research on. Like, why did they move? It could be a variety of reasons, and there's usually like some super legitimate ones, but I don't know where he would possibly get drafted. Where do you have him going anyways, Quincy?
I'd probably take him in the third and late third. I think on the board, where do I have him? He's just a really good football player. I know he's really small. I think I have him at 28.
Well, if he lit up everybody in the combine, that goes a long way.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, exactly.
And the two last numbers, the two jumps
are absurd.
Yeah,
they're absurd.
Insane.
He's also another guy who actually didn't have the most production this year at Manitoba, but Manitoba didn't have that much of a passing attack. And when you come in as a senior again, there's a little bit of rapport to be built there. He's a guy who actually came through the regional combine and if you actually watched him as a player, should have been in the national already.
The next player we've got is Keandre Smith, also a former CFC 100, has a lot of the measurables, which Quincy's going to talk about, played his university career at Guelph, I believe. Another outstanding athlete, class of 2018. What do you have to say about Keandre?
Yeah, he's actually the guy I've watched the least of these 8 guys. Although I saw all his one-on-one reps at the combine, and he was another one of the probably like top 3-ish guys at the national combine during one-on-ones. He's a guy who came in 2018 at Guelph and was an OUA all rookie guy, then had a down year in 2019. I only saw the stats. I'm not sure what the reason as to that down year in 2019 was. Then 2020 was off. And this year he was an all-Canadian. In 6 games, he had 38 catches for 448 yards, 4 touchdowns. And he's actually not the biggest, quickest. Like there's not really any standout athleticism there. His 40 was a 4.69. 32.5-inch vertical, 9.10 broad jump, 4.45 shuttle, 7.19 3-cone, and 4 reps on the bench press. So like he's not standout fast or standout quick or standout strong, but he's a very nuanced route runner. He can run the whole route tree, and I could see watching his one-on-ones. He won with his just route running kind of technique and nuance. Quite frankly, just is this little things he does. That's how he wins on his routes. He can bring some decent juice after the catch. And obviously, he's another guy like Cobb. I'm pretty sure Keandre Smith was an All-Canadian as a kick returner this year. That return duo they had at Guelph was scary with Smith and Clark Barnes.
Oh, wow.
That was a scary duo. Oddly, I actually think this is next year's problem, but Keandre Smith is actually probably the second best receiver on that Guelph team behind Clark Barnes, who's in next year's draft. So I'm excited for him and Keandre Smith.
How big is Keandre Smith?
He's 6'1", 190.
What do you know about him?
I remember him. Like I remember him off the list. I never followed his progression at Guelph. He was a fantastic high school player. If you weren't the best player on your team, they must have some players at Guelph, eh?
Guelph is actually, Western's looking pretty good the next few years, but I honestly think the next handful of years, Guelph will be the second best team in the OUA.
So let's talk about our last guy, Riley Borsma, class of 2018 again, also CFC 100. Extremely fast. He went to the University of Regina, and another solid route runner. So what do you have to say about him, Quincy?
Kind of like Cobb, another one of the receivers who came through the regional as an undersized guy. He's 5'10", 190. So he's short like Cobb, but he's built differently. Despite being undersized, he has like 20 pounds on him, built like a thicker guy. Mm-hmm. But Borsma ran a 4.4940, which was the fastest. No, Terrell Ford was the fastest, but he was the fastest receiver at the combine. Another 41.5-inch vertical, just like Gavin Cobb, 10'7" broad jump, so 3 inches less than Cobb. And to be fair, he is 20 pounds heavier. Put up 14 reps on the bench press, so that one killed Cobb. And a 7.033 cone, so shows off the quickness there. But he's another quick, shifty guy like Cobb. I'm not sure he's as complete of a route runner. Well, he isn't as complete of a route runner, and I'm not sure he has the hands that Cobb does. So that's kind of why I have Cobb ahead of him. I think Cobb's probably just the better football player. Riley Borsma, I could see him fitting into a team's offense as a bit of a gadget guy. The thing is, he's not that, or at least wasn't used in that many ways at Regina. It seemed like all he did was either come underneath and get yards after the catch, is like kind of just dump it off to him and let him see what he can do. Yeah. Or ran hook and goes. Like all his routes were on the vertical plane. Like it was either a hook or a stutter and go. Yeah. And if it wasn't that, it was just dumping the ball off to him and letting him run. But he's a guy who showed a little bit of tackle breaking ability, kind of like a running back as a smaller, thicker guy. Had good contact balance, good yard after catch ability, obviously, with them dumping the ball off to him underneath and letting him make plays. So I don't know if he can carve out a role somewhere, that'd be pretty interesting, because obviously him and Cobb are both guys who have unique athletic traits. Yeah. So that's kind of that's their little trump cards. So hopefully they both do well in the league.
And where do you see him going?
I have him and Keandre Smith at 33 and 34. So I guess that would put them in round 4.
What do you remember about Riley?
I always remember being a good tester. So he carried that on throughout his university career. So those are ridiculous test scores. I kind of, when I looked at the list that Quincy had put out for the receivers, I was like, you kind of like look at body types and player types. And I right away, I was like, him and Gavin Cobb, very similar, obviously similar right up till the testing phases. Once again, not so similar once they're actually playing the game of football. So I kind of like thought he looked like a running back almost, but tough to say sometimes when they don't have production and they're that athletic. That kind of like, that's questions. That's just certain things pop up for me. Those are ridiculous numbers.
Yeah, he's another guy who didn't have the most production, but Regina was not that good this year.
That's it for us today. Hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Recruiting Masters. This has been the Recruiting Masters, brought to you by the CFC Insider.